sure. Well, yeah. So I just want to ask you about how it's what it's like with your book going out into the world.
Sure. Well, it's a real mix of emotions. On one hand, I'm feeling super excited, looking forward to setting this book free. I'm also pretty nervous. You worry about whether people will like the book or not. And then I also feel a little bit of grief as well, which might seem kind of strange, but I would. I think it comes from just kind of letting a project go that you've been really invested in, and
Mhm.
that you really care about, and is in a way is just no longer yours.
Well, so we learned some interesting information before we started recording here. Is that I'm pretty proud of my pun. My pun is some of the effect of like I really feel like this book is going to have a long shelf life because it speaks to so much about what's going on today and the future, and hopefully in many ways we don't reach some of those things. But if a prophet is somebody who talks or writes about what's happening now, you're definitely a prophet because you've nailed so many things, so many issues that are going on today. But hopefully you're not a psychic, right?
Yeah,
There's something
I
about a psychic. You maybe have some history with that or something.
yeah, I did have an alter ego as a fortune teller for a little while. Um, my first name backwards is Argella, so I was
Oh.
Allegra or Argella, the fortune teller, and so that was a short-lived identity.
Allegra, obviously, there's something there in Latin and Italian about happiness, right?
Mhm.
Does Argella have a meaning, or is that just your name
Not that
backwards? That
not
sounds
that I
cool.
know of, but it's yeah, Allegra comes from allegro, musical term, fast and
Okay.
happy.
Yeah.
But I have to say I'm not much of a musician.
Okay. Well, so being that you are a college professor, you are such an esteemed writer. I just wonder about some of the beginnings, like your relationship with the written word. Were books all around the house? Who and what were you reading into adolescence?
Sure. So I was really lucky in that my mother was a librarian, and so I
Yes.
had incredible access to books and was exposed to books constantly, was read to a lot, and I'm sure that has made a big difference in kind of my trajectory as ultimately as a writer. Um, some early books that I really loved included The Chronicles of Narnia.
All right.
That was a real foundational text for me, and to the point that I owned audio tapes of all the Chronicles of Narnia and would listen to them over and
Mm.
over and over again, and could kind of just recite them. And I continue to be a big audiobook person, and it's a real kind of important part of my reading practice.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, I think other books that I was really into included myths, fairy tales, folklore, urban
Mm.
legend. I just gobbled anthologies of those stories up and was really just really enthralled by them.
Mm-hmm. Is there any sort of like amateur psychology or to be had here? I mean, was there a lot about like escaping to different worlds and or is it just like, oh cool, this is so cool, end of subject, or was there something there about escaping or hiding or just finding like some sort of community? I don't know.
I think you could do some psychoanalysis in that way. At one point, my family moved from rural New Hampshire to London for
Whoa.
a year, and so I went from being in a really remote rural place and then suddenly being in this bustling city, and it
Oh
was
my
really
gosh.
overwhelming. And I think one of the ways I coped as a child was um, by by listening to audiobooks, by reading, and I
Mm.
think even to this day, disappearing into a book, into a story is kind of just a way to cope with reality.
Yes, that's for sure. So we're not talking like London or New London and New Britain, like Connecticut. We're talking like England, like London,
Yeah,
England.
London, England.
Whoa,
Yeah.
that's a heck of a change. Man.
Yeah, yeah, I had an accent for a little while.
Ah. Can you bring it back? Does it come back ever?
I I
Couple drinks maybe?
not yeah, we'd have to we'd have to be off book.
That's funny. I mean, you are an incredible world builder. I mean, in this collection, there's so many worlds within worlds, and I think of the story with tell me the initials again, the
Oh,
HBHECB
HBEC, EC,
HBEC,
yeah.
right? I mean, just so many just stories and histories and world building. I think of like Matt Bell, one of the many people who's so great at world building, and you talk about how you were into myth and stuff like that. Do you do you feel like that's a type? Do you see world building as more of like on the creative side, like artistically, or more like on the science side, like precision? Does that make sense?
I I think it's probably a little bit of everything. And one of the reasons why I really enjoy doing it is that it stretches my brain and it
Mm,
allows me to pull from so many different bodies of knowledge and
mm,
gives me an excuse to do research
yeah.
and to um uh and be really inventive. So for a story like the story you just mentioned, which was Colonel Meriwether's intergalactic finishing school for young ladies and girls. It's like a
Thank you for
super
giving me
long
that time.
title.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's set on a spaceship and in the nearest future, and there's
Hmm.
this weird society of rich people, right? And so it's a chance to visualize a specific microculture. It's a
Mm,
chance to think about what are they eating, what are they like, how does the class system work
mm,
here, how do the economics work, and to answer all these different questions, I get to invent, and I get to, you know, like I said, pull from different fields, and that to me is just such a pleasure.
you said it gives you an excuse to do research. So research is fun for the most part.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I think that as a writer, I feel so privileged to get to have a reason to go down weird rabbit holes of
Sure.
like, boots from the 19th century. Did they have heels? And I love the process of discovery. Maybe this has to do again with having a librarian for a mother.
Mm-hmm. I've said it many times. I don't know that there are any job where people love their job as much as librarians.
Mm,
I remember the days of Dewey Decimal Systems, and it's so excited to show you the 700s or whatever for social studies and 300s, and just such a love for it. And it's so awesome that that your mom as a librarian, because I think of just beautiful times, right, with the librarians. I mean, how much are they just so cheesy, but just gave us such a world of exploration and discovery and such a space,
yeah,
right?
librarians are really at the forefront of so much. And I think about the book bans that are happening now, and I think about the ways certain political groups are targeting librarians
Mm,
and teachers who are kind of have little libraries. And I think that reflects how powerful libraries and librarians are, and how much
no
of
doubt
an
about it.
impact they have on creating better futures.
No doubt about it. So well, we'll talk about that in a minute actually. Who are you reading these days? Whether it's within, you know, I don't know, you could even nail down your genre, right? I mean, you write so widely and creatively, but who are you reading, whether it's like, for inspiration for your own work or just like puts together a darn good story?
Yeah, I try to read really widely, and to read books that are just coming out, and
Mm,
then classics, and then I like to really read across genre because, like you said, I tend to write across genre.
mm-hmm.
I just read this book called Sleepwalk by Dan Shawn,
Okay.
who I'm actually going to do an event with in Cleveland soon, and it was
Nice.
this really gripping near future vision of America with this henchman character who
Mm,
has a moment of epiphany, and it sends him on an incredible road trip. And
uh,
if you want to read some really interesting world building, I think that's a great a great novel to check out.
I've heard great things. Thank you for that recommendation. The last name is spelled Chaon.
Yeah, yep, yeah.
Awesome.
And then I'm doing a new novel that involves Thornton Wilder, actually. So I've been reading
Okay.
a lot of his works.
Oh, nice.
And so it's been I just read The Bridge of San Luis Rey, which is a classic, gets taught in a lot of high schools, and I think it really holds up.
Wow. Quite a compliment, man. In one of the mini blurbs from some grades, Alexander Kleeman writes that that the last catastrophe is dazzling and inventive, and there's more to it, but that's right on. It is dazzling. There's think of the story with the long title about the finishing school, the one we referenced in the near future in space, and the ending is so emotionally, pulls at you emotionally. But there's also you're just as a reader just dazzled, like dang, like with mainly two characters in that story, right? I mean, some of the other ones are side characters, but with mainly the two characters, and just to be able to pull that much emotion at the end, you're just like, whoa, like that's a
Yeah,
talented writer.
that story is written in the form of an audio transcript.
Right.
And it's between two characters, and I like giving myself little challenges sometimes, such as writing within a specific form. And in this case, I decided I wanted to write in the form of an audio transcript to talk about a finishing school date, to explore this kind of retrofuturism
Right.
within that form. And it was really challenging to figure out how to unlock the emotion at the end of the piece. But I'm thrilled to hear that it worked.
Well, a lot of that is the alternating between the silences and like the frenzied talking, right? Like asking the questions. There's about that play off, the playing off of each other, that silence and that frenzy. Did you just make up a word there with you said retrofuturism? I love that.
Yeah, I'm not I'm guessing someone else has used that at some point, but it's something that I definitely tried to bring to this collection, because even though the collection's very much looking towards the future, a lot of the stories are bringing patterns of the past into the future.
No doubt.
And so something like Democracy in America, which is a reimagining Alexis de Tocqueville in a near future America, was a way to show how certain aspects of the past, like a kind of Jacksonian exploitative presidential reign, let's say, could be manifested in our near future, unless we kind of choose to commit to a different trajectory. And so that would be one example of retrofuturism at play.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. The stories on their own, I mean, there are some absolute standouts. There's out of 15, there are 15 standouts. They can, can serve on their own. Some are very short. Some are 2 or 3 pages. I want to say the last one is 40, 50, right? The Eaters.
It's pretty long. It might be like 60 or something. You might call it a novella.
Exactly, right? So I just wonder, like, even with so many good individual stories, the sum is more than the parts. It's such an alchemy of just like a great collection. I wonder about any through lines you feel like, or I guess like, was through lines the first priority, or was it more like writing good stories and the through lines were kind of byproducts of that?
There's definitely a through line in my mind for these stories, and the way I would characterize that through line is kind of through the lens of something called global weirding. Have you heard of that?
I have, but please explain, because I mostly
Awesome.
heard about it through you.
Sure, yeah.
I heard about it through you and reading some of the stuff about your work. So that's the first time I heard about it.
Well, I'll share it. I'll share it
Please.
again. Global weirding is another way of kind of conceiving of global warming, and it's a less politicized way of thinking about it, but it's it's also, I think, just a more accurate way, because climate change isn't just about temperatures getting warmer. It's
Right.
about sometimes temperatures are colder, sometimes
Mhm.
storms are more extreme, sometimes migration patterns of animals are shifting, or plants are blossoming at the wrong time, or
Right.
weird spores from the Arctic are like
Mm.
unthawing. And it's global weirding is about how climate change is just making everything, all the natural systems in our world kind of go out of whack. And
Mhm.
alongside them, all of our, I think, human systems, social systems are kind of going out of whack too. And the collection is trying to embody, literally and figuratively,
Mm.
that that weirding that's happening. And it's, it's sometimes it might seem kind of silly, a girl's growing a unicorn horn, for instance, in one story, but the kind of underlying issue that I'm trying to show is very real and
Mm.
serious.
Global weirding. I like that. And that does make a lot of sense. Like you said, climate change doesn't quite encapsulate everything that's going on.
Or global warming, I think, is
Right.
kind of, yeah.
Right. Exactly. Excuse me. Right. But global weirding does. Yeah. The first line of the first story is called Mobilization, and it's quote, "We were multitudes, we were millions." Also, toward in the last story, towards the end, the professor says that line. Um, so evocative, but I wonder maybe if that was the beginning for you of like this collection, if that what that line meant, or if that was something you kind of added later. We were multitudes, we were millions, kind of what that means in a larger sense.
Yeah, I did write that first story, Mobilization, before I wrote The Eaters. Um, and I think as I was going through revisions and deepening what the professor in The Eaters is saying about,
Mhm.
as she's reflecting on society and where it went wrong, that line emerged, and it felt like a way to connect the beginning and the end of the book. And it
Mhm.
also felt like a way to speak to the collective consciousness that is a big part of the collection. As you may have noticed, there's a lot of stories that are told in first person plural.
Yep.
And I think there's also generally just a lot of stories that really emphasize groups. And
Mm.
we have plenty of individual characters as well, but it felt really important in this book to try to show how, just as we're individual specific people, we're also we're also part of we're part of collectives, we're part of communities, we're part of groups, and we make group decisions. And that's what part of what it means to be human.
Hmm.
And so that line is trying to capture that.
Definitely. And so, that first story you talk about, group, collectivity, and so there's in mass they go out in RVs, and they're, you know, I don't know if you did it on purpose too, but the idea of like the we and the first person plural, there's not a lot of names, especially given in that story, if any, right? It's
Yeah, I don't
just
think there's any names. It's
yeah.
just the collective of this herd of
Mhm.
RVs that are
Exactly.
they're roaming around the country, living their lives without a care until,
Mhm.
of course, disaster, as it does, strikes.
But I mean, it's described as like a diverse group of people. Some are kind of like the classic weirdos, and maybe who are in the RVs already, and I mean that with love. Some are families. Some are teenagers. Some are people looking to get away. Some are people looking to drive towards something, and everything is ephemeral. And they they shoplift, and they it's kind of, I've seen it kind of thinking of like what they say about millennials, that like they collect experiences, not things, right?
Mm. I mean,
And
as a millennial, I think I do both.
there you okay, there you go, right? And quote unquote, keep the engines running, which you can see in more than one way, literal and figurative. Kind of do what you have to do. It seems to me like because of the way that this group is, traversing the country in these RVs, they can afford to be politically uninvolved at the time. I wonder if you were going for something there, if I'm maybe reading too much into that, but just like, they don't, there's something about privilege, right? Where somebody doesn't necessarily have to be politically engaged. And for them, I
Yeah.
wonder about kind of what you're going with the way that they were just boom, 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 moving throughout. If something happened politically, they didn't really have time to notice it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that the story can be read in in multiple ways. One is that it's a story about a specific group of RVs that believe that they'll never kind of have to see any consequences to their actions, or wonder, or deal with any challenges. Or you can read the story as an allegory, maybe for the American people in a kind of generalized sense, and the fact that I think overall, so many of us just don't want to look at crises and at the tough choices that really need to be made around moving to a more sustainable economy, more sustainable energy system,
Right.
really looking at wealth inequality. I think most of us don't want to face all that, myself included, oftentimes. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that I'm
Yeah.
like, an angel. But so that's what that story is trying to show in a kind of sideways way.
Yeah. And, and feel free if you're just like, hey, I want to let the story live on its own. We don't need to or overanalyze. I'm thinking of, a lot of times the funniest things or the best humor has got a seed of truth, and it kind of makes you, after you laugh, go, dang. Mark Maron, the comedian, some of the effect of like, and I was all in the delivery, and I'm not gonna get the delivery right, but he was just kind of like, hey, we really tried really hard with with climate change and such, and we didn't use reusable bags, and well, it didn't work, that kind of thing. Just like kind of like the half-assed effort that was made. And like you said, I'm putting myself in that category too, where it's just like a lot of times it's easier just not really. I gave it an effort, right? That's
Well,
just
the
being
thing is, I
human,
think
right?
we've also been kind of conditioned to think that we have to solve it as individuals again. And then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like I can get reusable bags, but like, what else am I supposed to do? Like
Yeah.
and that's totally fair, because actually to mitigate the worst effects of climate change, we need structural changes to our infrastructure.
That's for
We
sure.
need actual regulation on our energy systems, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not a problem for the individuals. That's a government issue there. And so
Right.
I think that sense of kind of helplessness and even apathy is understandable.
I think it was in the Eaters, right, where I'm almost positive was where grass became a huge food source,
Yeah.
right? And I was just thinking of, like, talking about like all the golf courses that were out there getting water and how much money was spent on that. I just think about, like water issues and drought, which I'm in California here, and we've had you talk about global weirdness, like we've had crazy amount of rain, and our drought is kind of over, or we don't get that rain. But just like the idea of like individuals, and yes, I can work on not wasting my water, but like these huge farms and these huge industries that are or celebrities that use enough for 5 towns, right? And that's that part of the whole kind of collective that you're talking about, where it's got to be more than just the one. um
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
Yeah, right. The One of the lines that goes to what we're just speaking about from the book is, the tough part is feeling happy and sad at the same time. Technology and just part of being human is seeing the future as, I think, is seeing as having an optimism for the future, especially young people. But there's also the sadness of like, what are we leaving to the next generation, the next generation. I believe the story is called The Tough Part, and without giving away the ending, but that's the one, I believe, right, about where the family dress up like mooses.
Yeah, it's a pretty in some ways a silly premise. There's a mother and father who dress up as a moose in an effort to save the 5 remaining moose in the world. They're going to kind of try to gather the other moose by pretending to be a moose and take them to a safe place. And
Sounds like a great
it turns
plan.
out to be very challenging.
To say
Yeah,
the least.
totally foolproof.
Yeah.
um, but it's that quote, I think, is really central to my thinking about the future, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think facing the future in a way where we're both keeping some optimism and keeping some sense of possibility and hope,
Yes.
in our hearts and minds, alongside a sense of grief and a sense of anger and a sense of frustration. It's hard to hold both of those things at once,
Yes, it
but
is.
I think it's really important to hold
Mhm.
them both, because to kind of go in only one direction just kind of leads to either a sort of um a denial of how bad things really are,
Yeah.
or just a sort of nihilism that leads
Mm.
to not taking any action.
Definitely, definitely. I appreciated how the guy in the story, the husband, was former DJ, and while they're in the moose suit, she's like tapping out some of his old beats, and he goes from being like, I think he goes to literally being a real estate agent, right?
Yeah, feeding from the poisonous hand of capitalism.
Woo! Well, that's a great line. That's a great line. Yeah, exactly. Going from, DJ and creative and making people happy through art to, literally buying and selling land, right? There's a lot there. Man. The story, Zoo Suicides, I mean, what a title, is after, how do you pronounce, is it Donald Barthelme?
Donald Barthelme.
Barthélemy and Dana Deal. I wonder, and there's so many great lines from that story, but it's one of the lines is, quote, "Wasn't it true that any animal could kill under the right circumstances?" And without giving too much away, I mean, people are committing suicide through animals. And, some of the usual ways you might think are some of the usual animals, but it's also like you say here, any animal could kill under the right circumstances. I think there's a lot there about how we tend to domesticate so many animals. But my long-winded question is, how so was that story after those two great writers?
Sure. And it's kind of a weird, awkward story to talk about, because I
Okay.
think it's a story that um I think if it's talked about in the wrong way, it could seem like it's making light of suicide in a sense. And it's
I didn't get
that's
that at all,
not
but
all right, that's not the intention of the story, just as a kind of side note.
no, I appreciate
But
that.
in the way that it's kind of taking after those writers, one of my favorite stories is The School
Okay.
by Donald Barthelme. And I
Mhm.
really appreciate how he uses this kind of escalating absurdity to
Mm.
make a really profound um, point about the meaning of life. And
Hmm.
so I kind of was inspired by that, and I think the story kind of emulates that escalation. And
Okay.
then Dana Deal is actually someone I did my MFA with, and this story also emerged from kind of conversations with her. So I wanted
Mm.
to give credit where credit was due.
Oh, so cool. I think the school is literally the only story of his that I've read, so I want to go back and revisit that. But I definitely remember, like you said, the absurdity of it, but it
Mhm.
didn't take away from the profundity of it for sure. Oh man.